Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the From Adversity to Abundance podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Bateman, and I'm thrilled today to have with us a friend of mine, Dave Smith. Dave is the founder and owner of Smith House Design and Build. Dave, how are you doing today?
Good, Jamie. Thanks for having me. Really honored to be here.
Absolutely. This is going to be a fun one. Dave and I have known each other for years, and I've paid Dave a lot of money over the years, and I'm kidding, but not really. But no, we've worked with Dave and his company for years, which is has been fantastic, and we'll get into that. So Dave, give us a little bit more context for the listener out there. Who are you, and what are you up to today?
Yeah, so owner of Smith House Design and Build. Our company, we're Baltimore based, and we've been in business 18 years. We are a home remodeling company. We that's kind of our sweet spot, sort of all things home. So whether it's a large addition, whole house renovation, or handyman, we kind of encompass all that. We have cabinetry offerings in house and design offerings obviously in house, and yeah, it's fun. We enjoy it. We love it.
It's awesome. I mean, we'll obviously get in a little bit later into some of the ups and downs of the business. We're going to dive into that. I can't wait for that. But so just before we jump into your backstory, though, what does kind of give us a picture of what the company looks like? Number of employees, number of projects. What do you have going on today?
Yep. So we have 45 people on staff, and on the build division, what we call it, we normally have maybe 10 to 12 projects going at a time. And the handyman division, it's all over the map, because they're much smaller jobs. But
Sure.
it's a fun growth story, because we, at the beginning of the company, really had no clue what we were doing, what I was doing, and we've grown. And in some ways, I feel like we're just getting started, but we're around a $10 million company right now.
Okay. That's helpful for context. I mean,
Yeah.
that's impressive. Although it sounds like you're poised for growth. So we'll get into that. So talk to the listener out there who maybe they're working a W-2, and I don't know, maybe they're working for a construction company, and they're thinking about starting their own small business, or it doesn't even have to be in construction. But take us back really to before you started Smith House, and why did you want to jump into being an entrepreneur? What was your mindset at that time? What was the context of your life? I know there are a lot of questions there, but just kind of let's jump back to before you started Smith House, and what you were thinking, and what your kind of thoughts were as far as starting a small business.
Sure. There's some people, I think, that start a business, it seems, with a very clear, I want to do this, and I want to build this, and that wasn't my story. I graduated from Penn State with a history degree, and
There you go.
I had done construction during the summer times, just to raise money and so forth. And I went back to that. I had the opportunity to go be a full-time employee. I worked for a general contractor. He was an old school guy. He did everything. So it was he would be ashamed to sub anything out. So we did the electrical, the plumbing, the concrete, the everything. And I was actually his first full-time employee he had ever hired in 21 years of business.
Oh, wow.
So I learned a lot. And
Sure.
I went back to work for him after college. And long story short, I just, I tend to call it sawdust in the blood. I loved it. I loved the work. But what I began to see is that remodeling, it was an opportunity when somebody came and said, I want a new kitchen. I want to renovate my kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
What they were really asking for was a change in life, and
Mm-hmm.
just they wanted to experience their home differently. And so it was neat to be able to work inside people's, you know, enter into someone's life in such a
Sure.
personal space in their
Mm.
home, and
Yeah.
just I got to see the value that the work we did added to them, and that was very fulfilling for me.
No, that's really good because I mean, several things I could uh, unpack there. Obviously, we don't have time to unpack every bit of this, but that's, you know, for one, as you said, you enjoyed the work, and I was going to say I've seen you with maybe a clipboard, but I haven't seen you, you know, with a hammer or saw. But no, I'm kidding. But I love the fact that one, you didn't have this. I think it's so easy for successful business owners to look back and say, well, yeah, I had this great vision and this is exactly how I saw this happening 18, 20 years ago. And the reality is that's not usually the case. And even if you had that grand plan, it probably wasn't going to turn out exactly that way. So I like that you're just honest and real about that. You know, sometimes it's just a matter of getting started and um, looking at your strengths. But the other thing that I heard you say was, or at least you inferred, was that basically you were listening to the client and that it was bigger than just construction, like some, you know. So I think
Hmm.
there's some metaphor or analogy about a guy building a wall and you know, I forget, you can Google it, but it's more than just laying bricks. It's creating this masterpiece, and how are the people, is really about serving people is what you're getting to. So that's awesome. And I know over the years you and your team have always been very good at listening and not just forcing what you want on the customer. You actually want to understand, you know, what they want. So anyway, how did the first, you know, what did the first year of business look like? Take us back to that time.
Yeah, and just real quick to kind of follow up with what you just said, I think along with that, I quickly learned that it was almost kind of this theme. If somebody has a home, I can help them, because
Mm-hmm.
it was so much more than just that client. It was my mom, or the
Mm.
neighbor who has an issue. It was something that could be applied in so many ways, that if you got a
Mm-hmm.
home, I can possibly be of value to you, which is
Mm-hmm.
really neat,
Sure.
and kind of addictive a little bit.
Well, and just very quickly, that's this really gets to the crux of this podcast. Is I used to be a part of a note investing podcast, and that was really great. But what the episodes that we had that really people really loved were the human side of things, where we dove into people's backstories, and that's what we want to draw out in this show. Is there's a human element to all of this. And then but what you're saying is if they had a home, you could help them. Well, there are a lot of homes out there, right? So sounds like you immediately saw you could help a lot of people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and so, yeah, so even for you mentioned if there's somebody listening that is in construction and maybe considering it, kind of thing, toying with doing their own thing. I think for me, what made me take that step, and this was about a year and a half after graduating from college, that
Mm-hmm.
happened, um, was where I was. I great guy I worked for, but there just wasn't the vision for what we could do and build
Mm-hmm.
together, and really wasn't able to give things away, um, to to me to own, in terms of
Gotcha.
kind of micromanaging. And I can remember the day still. I was nailing up base trim in someone's kitchen for the 500th time,
Mm-hmm.
and he was standing over my shoulder watching to make sure
Mm-hmm.
I did it correctly. And I remember turning and saying, buddy, like, I got this.
Mm-hmm.
I'll finish this job. You go run
Mm-hmm.
another one, and we'll really build this thing. And
Mm-hmm.
it just it wasn't where he was comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, not right or wrong, it's just a comfort level. And for
Yeah.
me, I wanted to build something.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs start their business because they see that they can do it better.
Yeah.
I mean, no one wants to be micromanaged. I hate that, right? But it sounds like you realize, like, no, if I was in this guy's shoes, we could really blow this thing up in a good way, right?
Yeah, and a lot of it is I'm kind of a growth junkie.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, to kind of be, content with kind of doing the same thing and not really growing, and that puts me to sleep. It drives me nuts. I want to be building something and it expanding,
Sure.
and so we just looked at things differently.
Yeah.
And so starting off those first couple of years, there's more stories than we have time for, but I really was really a carpenter assistant kind of skill
Mm-hmm.
level,
Mm-hmm.
and had no clue about the business side of
Mm-hmm.
things. I can remember, one of my first larger jobs, we were converting a 2-car garage into a family room. And I remember doing the estimate and, starting to get a sense of, man, it kind of costs a lot of money to have a truck payment, and kind of I got to pay for insurance, and starting to get a little bit of that stuff. And
Yeah.
I can remember doing the estimate, and in the estimate form charging myself out at $13 an hour, um, and feeling guilty about it
Right.
because I had been paid 9 at my prior job, and I was like, I don't know if they're going to go for this.
It's highway robbery, right?
But just
That's funny.
no concept of
Yeah.
overhead, and
It's surprising your history degree didn't prepare you for that, but um
right, with history.
I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's really it gets to the point of the whole, I mean, running a business, whether it's construction or restaurant, is completely different than, you know, being building the house or cooking, right? So yeah, running a business is a whole different beast. I don't think any of us are fully prepared for it when we make the leap into entrepreneurship. So the first couple years, first of all, what would you say to the listener who they haven't started a business? You know, how do they decide? I mean, we understand it's not a one size fits all. There's not, you know, everyone should be an entrepreneur. That's definitely not the case. But looking back, how would you advise someone who is now in your shoes, you know, when you were working for that other company, to decide whether they should start a company or not?
Hmm. Um, I think for me, it's hard to say to someone whether I think they should
Hmm.
start a company or not. Um, I think for me, what I've learned is I just had a lot of opportunity, that
Hmm.
was presented to me,
Hmm.
um, and yes, it took a lot of grit and determination and things like that,
Sure.
but ultimately, I almost, if you think of like the old school tricycle with the big wheel in the front and
Hmm.
the two, I almost think of it, opportunity is that big wheel in my
Mm.
experience as a business owner.
Okay.
And the capacity and grit are kind of the back
Mm.
two. And
Okay.
for me, I had lots of opportunities.
Hmm.
Um, and it's almost like the opportunities are what drove that train
Mm.
initially.
Uh-huh.
Um, and yes, I had grit and I worked my butt off, and I had the capacity to kind of do that. Um, but it's kind of like, for me, when you start, if you haven't exercised in a while, which you look great, by the way, Jamie. You look like you're
Thanks, Dave.
uh,
Thanks.
if you haven't exercised for a while and you first start going back to the gym, you only really get, at least in my experience, I only get motivated after I've gone for a while. Like the
Hmm.
motivation isn't there right out the gate. I kind of have to suck
Sure.
it up for the first couple months, and
Yeah.
then it becomes a little bit more addictive, and I get more motivated.
Sure.
Um, the running a business, or sometimes even with complicated things like that, it's like that from in my experience, where I had opportunities, I responded to those, and then as I'm going down the path,
Hmm.
it just builds the grit, the hard work. It's kind of
Sure.
building on one
Feeds on
another.
itself. Yeah.
It
It
does.
builds upon itself. So yeah, I guess, you know, I guess, why didn't you just, if you didn't like being micromanaged by this guy, and hopefully he doesn't listen to this, um, why didn't you just go work for another contractor though, as opposed to starting your own business? Sounds like because you saw the opportunity, and you know, it just, you saw how you could help so many people. But I guess, you know, anything to add there as far as why you didn't just get another job versus starting your own company? Because they're two very different things.
Yeah, good question. I think that one thing I've learned about myself is I do enjoy kind of charting my own path.
Hmm. Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
at the same time, that's that's also led to some adversity in
Hmm.
the story of
Yeah.
Smith House.
Yeah.
Um,
I would say for people, just this is my own 2 cents. Look, life has seasons. Just because you start a business doesn't mean that's what you're going to do for the rest of your life. So maybe you try it for a couple years, and you put in that grit, and it starts. Um, Maybe you realize this is what you're supposed to do, or maybe you realize no, you should go backwards, and maybe not backwards, but pivot and get a W-2. I mean, there's nothing wrong with trying to start a business. And But it's not always a permanent thing either. So, um, yeah, that's just my 2 cents there. So let's talk about. Obviously, we're gonna have to gloss over some of the ups and downs of the business, but I know you had some struggles early on in the business. Let's talk about that. What was some of the adversity you faced with the business?
yeah. So again, it was at the beginning, it was me and a few, great guys that were working with me, but we were honest,
Hmm.
hardworking guys, but really did not have a background and skill and things like
Hmm.
that we knew how things needed to happen. I just knew we could figure it out. And
Hmm.
so
I love that.
those
Yeah.
first couple of years was, I wasn't very social with friends. I was on the nights and weekends, I was reading and studying on
Hmm.
construction and, all things home, and then the finance side of things. And
Yeah.
it was kind of going to school on those kind of things. And then about a year and a half in, I joined up with another guy, and we had formed a partnership, and um, that lasted a little over a year.
Okay.
And one of the challenges with that is that he was in a similar boat, where we loved construction, we loved carpentry and building, but again, the business side was not
You
there.
brought
That
you brought similar skill sets to the table, right?
we did,
Yeah.
and without realizing it, we had gone into debt, um,
I see.
to the tune of $65,000, which at that time was a ton of money.
Sure.
Um,
So just briefly, we won't stay there for too long, but how is that, like credit card debt, or how did that work?
uh, no, not necessarily. It really was, we we weren't charging enough for projects.
Hmm.
Um, so we weren't really making money on projects. However,
Yeah.
we didn't feel that as long as we were busy,
Sure.
because there was still an inflow of cash, and there wasn't a great accounting of, you know,
Yeah.
our expenses, what we owed people.
Yeah.
And then when things slowed down, this was kind of 2006-ish, for a couple months, and it all of a sudden was like, oh my gosh, we're fully paid up and we owe people a lot of money.
So you
Um,
own vendors or subcontractors or
we did
got it. Okay. Understood.
a lot of them, and it was painful, and lots of people were telling us to declare bankruptcy, and it was
Mm,
a challenging time. The partnership split at that point,
okay.
and I kind of had to make the call at that point. What am I going to do? Am I going
Right.
to continue on with this, or am I going to call it quits and
Yeah.
declare bankruptcy and things like that?
Wow. I didn't realize it had gotten that. I knew a little bit about that, but that's, it's pretty real. So what's going through your mind at that point, and how is that affecting your, let's be honest, your ego and confidence as a, as an entrepreneur, as a man? I mean, how's this
Yeah.
what's going through your mind?
I mean, it was certainly one of those life moments where you felt broken,
Mm-hmm.
and I can remember just bawling, and
Mm-hmm.
with a family member, my dad, talking about
Mm-hmm.
it,
Mm-hmm.
and um over the course of a couple of days, just did a lot of deep thinking of what was going to be the next move, and
Mm-hmm.
I did not. I know situations different, but at that time it was such a small company, and it was such small relationships with different subcontractors and things. The bankruptcy was just not an option for me.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
consider it. Um, so it was kind of a decision, like, we're gonna do this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and thankfully had some help, through a little family loan, kind of, from my
Mm-hmm.
dad to
Mm-hmm.
help us get over that hump, and came to an agreement with all the various subcontractors, kind of payment plans and things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
um, around the same time, we became pregnant with our first.
Okay.
Um,
And as exciting as that may be, I imagine you see a dollar sign of
oh
expenses,
my
if
God,
we're
yeah,
being honest, right?
absolutely. I already, for a couple of months, had not been paying myself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it was just we were just living off of my wife's
Mm-hmm.
salary, which was not, much,
Mm-hmm.
kind of an administrative assistant kind of level.
Yeah.
Got pregnant. I didn't, take a salary for close to a year.
Hmm.
Um, and so that was, it was just a
Yeah.
grind.
I appreciate
It was
you sharing this because, it's, look, we've had guests cry on the show. We're not trying to get there, but, um, that's not the goal, but it's, this is very real. And this wasn't like it's going to be a 15 minutes in a podcast episode, but it was a couple of years, if not longer, of hardship that you had to go through. So for the entrepreneur who hasn't started their business, not saying that's going to happen the same way, but are you up for that? Do you know? I
yeah.
mean, um, because it's just so easy to look back, or to look now at your picture, Dave, the picture of Dave Smith, the successful business owner, and say, man, that must be nice. He's got it all together. So I appreciate you being vulnerable and real, with us. And so, your wife gets pregnant. So then, are you, how are you attacking this problem? What happens next?
Well, I got into a habit of underselling, a very, very dangerous habit of underselling jobs, so we get them and we have something coming, and
Uh-huh.
trying to do as much as we can, and maybe running more than one at a time. And
So very
um,
short term thinking, really, right?
short-term thinking, survival mode.
Sure, sure.
And so right about that time, as my wife's, you know, coming due with our first, we had one of our most challenging clients in 18 years. Fairly large whole house renovation. And even for the purposes of this show, I was
Hmm.
thinking about it. It was me kind of asking just thinking about the question, what's my role in someone else's story? Am I part of
Mm,
their story of adversity, or am I part of
mm,
their story of abundance?
mm. I love
And
that.
they were a part of my story of adversity at that time.
Uh-huh. So,
And
how can you explain that briefly? What do you mean by that?
in that they, it just were really challenging,
They were difficult to
clients,
work with.
difficult to work with, and were more interested in um, their abundance than
I see.
anyone else. And
Okay.
so, kind of taking advantage of others.
Got it.
And I can
That,
remember, to give an example of how that time was, the day Alice went into, you know, labor, and the
hmm
day after, right away, I'm out working in the
mm,
field. Um, just because of this pressure of,
hmm
a,
A
a
demanding client.
d-
Yeah. And you've got to
demanding
make
client, no
money
money.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot on your shoulders. I mean, that's that's a lot of pressure for sure. So, okay. So how did things unfold over the ensuing weeks and months?
Well, we got through that time, thankfully, and it just had some great people with me. JP, who's kind of been with me from day one, he's just
Hmm.
such
Yeah.
rock solid. And
I'm not sure what you do
um,
without him.
yeah, I know. So I think of those relationships that
Sure.
really, during those tough times, made such a difference. But I think also one of the things I learned in those early years was, and especially if somebody is considering, whether this field or whatever, but just the value of um, being okay looking like an idiot,
Hmm. Okay.
is
Yeah.
so important, because when you're starting something out, it just, you don't know what you don't know, and just
Yeah.
being okay to just ask someone.
Right.
I would all the time ask, whether it's a trade contractor or whomever, like, hey, educate me about that, tell me about
Sure.
that.
That's good. Yeah.
And what you find is, lots of times, people enjoy sharing their information,
Yeah.
sometimes too much. um
Yeah.
and so
Definitely. I mean, but that's where the growth happens, right? And I'm not saying my ego never gets in the way. I'm certainly not saying that, but that's we only have so many hours in the day. You're not you can't learn to be a surgeon. There's plenty of things that you're an expert in, Dave, that I'm not, and vice versa, and that's okay. So
yeah,
it's okay that I don't know. So much I don't know. So I'm not typically embarrassed to ask the dumb questions either, because so what? That's not my field of expertise. Like there's like it's
yeah,
impossible to know everything. So but that's where the growth happens. And like I said before, you're a very good listener. And so it sounds like you surrounded yourself with experts. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you were gleaning information from others who knew a lot more than you, and you were willing to be vulnerable and look stupid, as you said. Um,
yeah.
so okay, was that just like in the like learning business or learning construction, or is this how did that look like tactically? You mentioned JP, but were there others like coaches, or how was this? How did that look?
That's one thing I would say, to the coach comment. I did have consultants, and I was reaching out all the time asking, how do you do this or that? But if I could have done something earlier,
Hmm.
it would have been to really engage and just pay for a great coach.
Like a
Um,
great business coach, right?
yeah. I think that, you know, I had some coaches in the early years, but not
Hmm.
anything that was a real commitment, that it just was a great fit. And now, having had that, I think the light bulb moment for me, sometimes you have those kind of light bulb moments. And I can
Sure.
remember, I don't know if you've ever seen the Usain Bolt movie.
No.
They had a documentary about him.
Uh-huh.
This was years ago, but I can remember sitting there watching this, and they're interviewing Usain Bolt, and here this guy's like the fastest human in the world,
Hmm.
and he's saying, I wouldn't have been anything without my two coaches.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
he's giving all the credit to his
Hmm.
two coaches. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, if this guy's the fastest human in the world and he's saying he'd be nothing without his coaches,
Yeah.
what the heck am I doing?
Yeah.
I need to really make this a priority.
Sure.
Um,
That's
and so
really
I
good advice.
did, and it's
Okay.
kind of never looked back. Um,
Nice. So did you at that point, like you started paying for a coach, or was this year 3 or 4 in the business? When did you get a coach?
I wish it was year 3 or 4. No, this is 3 or 4 months ago. No, I'm kidding.
Oh.
Um, no, again, I had some consultants and coaches
Right.
the first several years of the business, but this was 5, 6 years ago when
Gotcha.
really hunkered down and got intentional with a great coach.
Hmm. Gotcha.
Um,
Um, so maybe we can touch on that in a little bit if we have time. But so walk us through kind of we've kind of left off where, you know, things were really struggling in the first few years. And you're not taking a salary. Kind of walk us through the next few years as far as the business goes. And then I know there's some more personal, I guess, family growth that came with some ups and downs as well. Um, how did the next, say, 5 years of your life unfold?
yeah, and just to give even a high level fast forward, because I've been told you know, people look at our life and think we just love chaos, but you know, 5 kids, 3 dogs. It's a very busy
Hmm.
household, and it's kind of, well, how did that all get there? Um, so during that, tough time, had our first, and then over the next couple of years, I'm slowly building things with JP and
Hmm.
building the business, and we're getting some good traction. We're
Hmm.
starting to make some progress and grow, which is
Nice.
great.
Yeah.
Um, Still was not,
You
paying
weren't
ourselves
killing
much.
it.
It was slim pickings,
Yeah.
for sure.
The business
Um,
seems stable at this point, but we're not talking financial abundance at
Not
that
at
point,
all.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, not
Got
at
it.
all. Um, we moved to Baltimore City, which we love. There, we love Baltimore.
Hmm.
And we became involved in some different organizations. And my wife, was part of starting one that, just worked with, you know, you know, people in either lower income areas, like kind of on the margins.
Hmm.
She works specifically with organizations with teen moms and teen dads.
Okay.
Um, and it was through this whole time that, and it was weird because it was still in this kind of season of adversity that,
Hmm.
um, we just, our eyes were open in so many different ways to kind of the needs around us, and,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, race and Baltimore, and,
Mm-hmm.
the different inequalities that are just present, and things that I witnessed, even remodeling in people's homes, the stories that, some are just painful to think back on,
Mm-hmm.
of, some of those issues. And we we decided that we wanted to adopt, and we wanted to do it locally, domestically.
Okay.
And so we started down that path, and this was probably a year after our first was born. We officially
Hmm.
did that. And it wasn't
Hmm.
too long after that we were doing the home study, and we had,
Hmm.
we're starting to get things in order. And I think we had paid a $3,000, deposit toward our adoption fee kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, and at
So
that time,
you're pretty
somebody,
serious about it at that point, right?
we are, which
Yeah.
$3,000 at that time was a
Yeah.
pretty significant
Yeah.
sacrifice.
Sure.
Um, and it was about that time, a friend of a friend of a friend kind of thing, that we knew from the church we were attending,
Hmm.
knew we were interested in adopting, and met with us and said, hey, there's a family that has kind of been, the kids have been in and out of child protective services.
Hmm.
Would you have interest in, you know, fostering, or,
Hmm.
perhaps that could lead to adoption? Well,
Hmm.
at the time we thought about it, and it was a sibling set. Um,
Okay.
um, at first we said no.
Okay.
Um, we would have had to forfeit the deposit we had just made,
Hmm.
and it was a sibling set of four,
Hmm.
and
Wow.
we're like, I don't know how we're gonna swing that.
Yeah.
Um,
Logically, it just makes no sense, right? For
yeah,
given your circumstances. Yeah.
it didn't.
Right.
Um, well, fast forward a couple of weeks, and we got a call from, yeah, this is where I could get emotional talking about it, but we got a call from someone that was, caring for the kids, and
Hmm.
taking them out to dinner at Chick-fil-A, and essentially said, I can't take them back to that house. I'm either going straight to social services, or, whatever, but it's late. Can you help me out, and can we come by your house for the evening until I can get in touch with CPS, kind of thing?
Hmm.
Um, so we said yes, and they never left.
Hmm.
Um,
Wow.
I mean, long story short, but yeah,
Yeah.
so we then applied, became foster parents. Um,
So
talk
so
about it.
literally you wake up on a Tuesday, because I know it wasn't Sunday if they were at Chick-fil-A.
Yeah,
Um
true.
but um you don't have these, is it two girls, right?
Uh, three,
Three. You
and at
said
the time it was
four.
four. We had their
Okay.
brother as well.
Okay. But you and then that morning you don't have them, and then that night you do, right?
Yeah.
And you had no intention of that happening that day, um when you woke up. So okay, so you applied, you go through the process, the administrative and legal process of of taking custody, or how does that work?
Well, first it was, yeah, to become foster parents. So there
Foster
were
parents,
classes
yeah.
we had to take, and because the need was so great, they actually let us act as foster parents before we were technically
Gotcha.
approved, so to speak. Um, and we very quickly just felt like this is what we
You
want to
should
do.
you should do
You know,
this. This is what
yeah,
you're meant to do.
yeah.
Gotcha. Well, now, I mean, obviously, this is like a monumental thing in your life and their lives as well. And it's just not unfortunately, we just gloss over this stuff on the podcast, and you know, it's obviously a lot more involved and complicated than we're going to make it sound. But just briefly, at this point, I guess if you were so wrapped up previously in your own problems, and I don't mean that and like to put you down, but how did this reframe your own like financial challenges that you had when you were now focused on somebody else's challenges?
It's funny because sometimes you hear, um, I think lots of times entrepreneurs even talking about that they learn the value of when you're kind of other focused and you're helping others, it
Yeah.
ironically helps you.
Yeah.
And really it's a message as old as Jesus, but
Sure.
nonetheless, it seems new to us all the time. But
We
despite
don't,
all
yeah,
that,
we need to relearn things like,
yeah, I
but
know exactly. Um, despite all of that challenge and just really tough times
mhm,
on so many levels, there was still a sense of abundance even in the
mm,
midst of it,
mm,
because we just loved these kids, and
mhm,
it um and talk about feeling that you're adding value and providing, you're
yeah,
moving someone toward abundance
yeah,
in the fulfillment of that was, um
sure.
that's what it was. And so we were foster parents. That process was close to 3 years. um
Wow.
it was, if you think of a roller coaster, the highs and the lows were extreme,
Mm.
um because early on, the Maryland has one of the highest reunification rates in the country
Oh, okay.
of to their biological parent. And our first foster, social services rep made no, it was not unclear at all that her clear intention was reunification,
Wow.
um,
Okay.
with the biological parents. Which the more we learned of the story and the
Mm-hmm.
trauma that they had gone through,
Mm.
it just broke your heart over and over again. Um, we had to do weekly visits with the biological parents, and
Okay.
you would just on a weekly basis, we have the visit that
Mm.
would then trigger
Yeah.
a really tough couple of days of kids not understanding. And by the way,
Mm.
our kids were 1, 3, 4, and 5 at that time
Wow.
that we were fostering. Um, and then our first biological son was 4, so kind of right in that mix.
I see.
Um,
Yeah. So they don't understand. I mean, that's got to be just super challenging for all of them as well. Um, and
it was awful.
confusing. And I mean, yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, it's so okay. So how does so you did that for 3 years, the foster parent thing. We make it sound like it was just a thing you did, but and then how did things progress after that 3 year period?
Well, we made clear that we wanted to adopt,
Mm-hmm.
and even we would have several court cases a year,
Mm,
where the judge would weigh in on whether or not
mm,
what would be the decision. And those were awful because you pack bags just in case the decision is to
wow.
reunify, and that might be it. But
Wow.
anyway, um, we ultimately we agreed to an open adoption, um,
Mm,
and it's one of those things that people, and they just mean well, and
mm-hmm.
so totally understand it. But sometimes you get the kind of, oh man, that's so, those kids are so lucky, and
Mm-hmm.
good for them. And Alice and I always want to respond and say, like, no, you don't get it. Like, we're the
Mm-hmm.
ones that have been blessed more than them,
Mm,
because we've learned so much that we just otherwise would not have been,
mm,
not have known,
mm-hmm.
things about special needs, things about trauma, things about mental
Mm-hmm.
health,
Mm-hmm.
um, things about race. We have a
Mm,
mixed race family, so
mm-hmm.
we've
Sure.
encountered things that otherwise we never would have had
Mm-hmm.
to do. And the result, you just feel so thankful for
Hmm.
that decision.
Well, I mean, both things can be true. The kids are better off because of the decision you and Alice made, but also you've benefited as well. So yeah, I don't think it's possible for anyone on the outside to fully get it, but I mean, that's awesome that you're able to look back and see the blessing that was in that adversity, really, really for everyone involved. So, and now just jumping back to the business, how does your business look at this period of time?
So we continue to grow. We've been on a steady growth trajectory,
Mm-hmm.
for the past 15 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably not that long after we adopted our kids, that we moved into design, and we started
Okay.
doing interior design in-house.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
which some of the things as we grew, they came out of a frustration, out of
Mm-hmm.
just similar to even starting Smith House, of we can do this better. Like
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
service is not great. And so
Sure.
there was a lot of frustration with kind of the traditional design bid build
Mm-hmm.
model, where you design plans, you send it out for bid, then you
Mm-hmm.
pick a contractor and you build it. But what happens so often is the costs come back because the architect's not really an authority on the cost. So costs come back way over budget, and
Mm-hmm.
you're spinning everyone's wheels. Meanwhile, the clients fell in love with this beautiful
The
design
design.
that
Yeah.
can't be built. And so we started design just out of our frustration of like, there's a better way, you
Sure.
know. Let's speak authoritatively both on the build and the construction side of things and on the design side of things, and let's marry those two things, and
Mm-hmm.
let's just make it simpler for people and more
Sure.
efficient. So
Got it.
um
Okay, so it sounds like I know there've been ups and downs in those 15 years on the business side, but in general, if you looked at the last 15 years, there's been a lot of growth in your business, right?
correct, yeah, it's been
Been a
fun,
ride.
I think. Yeah, it's been a ride, I think. We're big on the team, we're big on our culture.
Yeah.
I think one of
Well,
the things early on that got us through those tough periods was just levity, just laughing at things.
sure.
Um, and because of that, one of our kind of core values is Will Ferrell, which
That's amazing. Like you're dead serious, right?
dead serious. It's just
Wow.
we um we like to work hard but have fun, doing
Sure.
it.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things, and it actually gets to one of the things I notice about your business from the outside, and it clearly with the fostering and adoption, you've shown that you and your wife are not just focused on making money, but you're also focused on serving others. But looking at your business from the outside, one of the things that I've seen that makes you stand out is just some of the service that you've been able to provide to people and organizations through your business directly. Can you speak to that? What does that look like? Why do you do that? Why do you take on those projects? And I imagine it gets to the culture of your business. So give us a little more context there.
Yeah, so I'm a just by nature a competitive person. You and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have played lacrosse together.
Yeah.
I
You played
played lacrosse
lacrosse
in
with,
college.
yeah, with my brother at Penn State. Those were
Yep.
fun
And
games to watch.
your listeners should know, because they probably don't realize, but in some circles you were called the legend. So
We're
for
gonna have
your
to,
play on the
yeah, we're gonna have to work that into the the, the title of this episode, or at least the show notes or something. The legend.
call it the legend, and it's not about the guest speaker at all. It's about
No,
you.
it's about me. Well, I think Dave, you are the one that keeping that one alive. So I'll send you some more money to keep that going. So, but
Thank you.
I'm just kidding. But yeah, so speak to, what does that look like? How do you do volunteer work, or what does that look like from the company standpoint?
Yeah, so, and yeah, as I was saying, I just kind of a competitive person, and first couple of years of the business, I mean, honestly, my thought was I want to be the best, and I want to be the best
Sure.
in the Baltimore, and I want to take this guy down, and I want to take them down,
Yeah.
and I that has changed over the years. And I
Okay.
remember I didn't coin the phrase, but I remember sitting listening to someone speak at several years ago, and another light bulb moment, and it was like, that's
Hmm.
it. That's who we are and what we're headed
Mm.
for. But essentially, the comment was, you know, we don't need as many people that are interested in being the best in something. We need more people that are interested in being the best for something. And so what
Mm.
I take from that is I don't really care about being the best in Baltimore.
Mm.
I'm more interested in us being the best for Baltimore.
Mm. That's
And
great.
so what that means to me is that, and even to, you know, just borrow a phrase from your podcast, is looking for ways to, you know, be other focused and move people toward abundance. Again, like,
Hmm.
whether it's my staff or whomever, like, am I part
Hmm.
of their adversity story or part of their abundance story?
Hmm.
And so we are, you know, we have a high, you know, priority on just the community, and we want to make an impact in Baltimore because there's just so much work to be done.
Sure.
um when
Yeah.
you
So
sometimes
what are
think,
some of the, I'm sorry, what are some of the projects or groups you've gotten involved with?
well, so much of it in the past has been reactive,
Okay.
where people will reach out and say, hey, do you want to be a sponsor, or do you want to
Hmm.
do, you know? And we call it the Building Better Baltimore campaign, that it's new. I mean, we're developing it
Mm.
this year. It's a
Okay.
it's a it's a proactive way we want to form relationships with different organizations,
Okay.
and um, you know, just slowly feel like we're making an impact, and we're doing more than just responding to the calls that come into the office.
Hmm.
So a quick, for instance, would be last week we had Safe Alternatives. Van
Hmm.
Morris runs that organization, and it's all about providing, you know, kids that maybe don't have those opportunities,
Hmm.
particularly that I had growing up,
Sure.
um, with information and kind of a way in,
Hmm.
uh, to different companies for a career that are coming out of
Okay.
high school. Um,
Love it.
and so we had a, you know, fun day at our office, and we had some practical, you know, tips and tricks on how to do things, drywall
Hmm.
framing, and then we talked about, you know, what design is like, what the build is like. Letitia from our team talked about, hey, what's a good resume look like, you know, from an HR
Sure.
perspective. Um, so that, I guess that's kind of an example, but more than
Yeah.
even, you know, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's
It's
a
really good. Um, one of the things that comes to mind, you get, I guess, speaking to like kind of entrepreneurship, and we're going to move toward wrapping up. I've got some rapid fire questions as we kind of land the plane a little bit, but um, the you know capitalism slash entrepreneurship, to me, this is, my view is I see it as a great thing. I mean, granted, anything can to an extreme is not good, but because you've been focused on building this company and being the best, you've now actually have a bit bigger platform and more resources to be able to make a bigger impact. So, um, there's this sort of, not that Dave Smith's here counting all his pennies and it's all about your net worth, but um, I guess what would you say to somebody who's kind of anti-entrepreneur, anti-small business, or anti-capitalism, with regard to their, them being all greedy and versus look at your company, you're a force for good. So how do you view that as far as just being focused on making money, making a profit versus serving kids in inner city Baltimore? How do you put that in, how do you frame that?
um that's a great question. Um you know, it's tough because on the one hand, lots of times in my experience, when I meet maybe a fellow business owner or something, and they're just high on drive, they're just off the
Mm-hmm.
charts.
Sure.
Sometimes that makes me a little nervous.
Mm.
Because I know, but only because I know myself. And at
Mm-hmm.
times when I've been so high on that drive,
Mm-hmm.
I can tend to focus more on myself,
Sure.
and what I'm doing and my goals and my.
Yeah.
Um, Jim Collins,
Mm-hmm.
author, Good to Great,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep.
He has an analogy that we talk about at Smith House a lot, but it's called window and mirror maturity. Um,
Okay.
which I think is helpful for me when thinking stuff like this. But window and mirror maturity, it's a spectrum. Like, how
Mm-hmm.
mature are you? And
Mm-hmm.
on the healthy end of the spectrum, if you're very mature, you have high window and mirror maturity. But what that means, it's all about how you look at your own success and
Mm-hmm.
how you handle criticism. So, am I likely to point out the window to factors outside myself
Mm.
for my
Mm-hmm.
success?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I likely to point in the mirror and
Mm.
say it was all about me,
Mm-hmm.
all about my hard work?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you do the same with criticism. When somebody criticizes you, are you likely to point out the window and blame other circumstances, or are you likely to, own it and look
Take
in the mirror?
ownership. Sure. Yeah.
Um, and so I think that I think there's probably examples of great examples of capitalism and companies
Yeah.
doing awesome things. And I
Sure.
think that, like anything, to your point, to an extreme, things you
Yeah.
got to watch out for.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I just think you have people on both extremes where you've got some people who say, well, money doesn't matter, you know, um, it's, I've got everything I need, that's greed and I'm not going to feed into that. And to me, that's somebody who's maybe not making the impact they should be because they're not growing, creating, um, you know, so there's excuses on either side. Then the other side is obviously just like you said, all totally focused on your own business and your own growth and not serving others. But it's, I guess, to me, money and capitalism and business, it's kind of like the internet. It's not necessarily good or bad, but it's very, it can be used for good or bad, and it's not something to ignore. It's something to own, and it's a very important thing that we need to steward and use for good. So I'll get off my soapbox, but um,
Totally
so
agree. Yeah.
so as far as kind of the more recent, like what is your, because I've got some rapid fire questions right after this, but who is your ideal client? Who do you look to serve in the greater Baltimore area? Speak a little bit more about your business. I can say that we've worked with you guys for years, and if we were disappointed, we wouldn't keep coming back. You've added a ton of value to multiple houses of ours, and not just the houses, but our family. So you and your team have done a phenomenal job with several big projects for us. And I know you've done so much other good in the community, but who do you serve as far as your business, and what's your client, the avatar of your client look like?
Uh-huh. Yeah, so I think on the one hand, again, we're all things home. So we'll have handyman projects, we'll do large projects in terms of project type. In terms of type of client, we are in more of a higher end kind of luxury market,
Yeah.
um, for our kind of sweet spot projects. And one of the reasons that is kind of where we find our niche is because we spend a lot of time focused on the experience
Mm-hmm.
of the client going through it,
Yeah.
and the management of it, and making sure things are buttoned up, and so there's cost to that. And so
Sure.
there's only certain demographic that can certainly
Yeah.
make that
Afford that.
investment. Yeah.
Sure. Makes sense. Got it. Awesome. And so very quickly, this is almost not going to do this justice, but I know you mentioned before we hit record, uh, you've had a lot of kind of ups and downs with your own spiritual growth, and we could have a whole episode just on this. But looking back at everything we've talked about, it's almost, again, not really fair here, but how would you frame your own kind of spiritual growth with regard to your family experience and your business experience? What would you say to the listener out there about that topic?
Yeah, to your point, well, it could be a
But
follow up, but
episode 2, we can dive into this one more.
yeah, I think what I found just as I was thinking about our conversation leading up to it, what I find interesting about a spiritual topic in my life is that oftentimes I tend to think of adversity to abundance in a linear fashion,
Hmm.
particularly financial or something.
Sure.
Um, and that's not, in my experience, always the case. That
Hmm.
and particularly in spiritual life now, of just kind of over the past several years, you know, coming to a place where I felt, hey, there's some parts of my tradition that I don't want to hold on to
Mm.
anymore. And the adversity that came from that is deep and really complicated, because then
Hmm.
I became kind of an outsider from those
Mm.
family and friends that were a part of that tradition
I
still.
see.
And I was the one, am the one kind of that's
Mm.
that's the lost kind of thing.
I
And
see.
at the same time, such a really cool level of abundance and just freedom, and
Mm.
um, that I've never quite experienced in the same way.
Yeah.
And so
Interesting.
marrying the two of them is really interesting, and certainly a deep topic. But
Yeah.
yes,
Love to bring you
we
back.
we briefly touched on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Um, but that's, I mean, hey, kudos to you for doing that deep work instead of just accepting everything as is. But all right, so rapid fire questions. These are going to have to be real quick, and then we'll get out of here. You ready?
Yep.
What is one thing that people misunderstand about you, Dave?
I tend to come across as a total goof, and sometimes people can misunderstand me for
Gotcha.
probably not thinking through things as much as I really do.
I mean, Will Ferrell is one of your company tenants, so I don't know. Maybe you can't blame them. But anyway, I'm
I
just
don't
kidding.
know, totally valid. Yeah.
If you could go back and give your 18-year-old self some advice, what would it be?
Oof. Um, Probably the coach comment we talked about earlier,
Sure.
of
Got it.
really making that a priority.
Love it. If you could have coffee with any historical figure, who would it be?
Mm. You should have sent these ahead of time.
Nope. This is the fun
May,
part.
maybe that's the point. Um, Gosh. Um,
It can be the legend. That's fine. They can still be alive. It can be me. I'm just kidding.
I'm gonna say you. Yeah.
All right. I was kidding. But if you were given $10 million tomorrow, Dave, what would you do with it? Not for your
Free, no
company,
strings
just
attached.
no strings attached. You don't even know who it came from.
Well, listen, you don't have to do that for having me as a guest, but um, I would. I probably, we've a dream is to have a beach house at Rehoboth. I'd probably
Nice.
accelerate that, and I'd probably want to, if it's just a gift out of nowhere, I'd, hey, let's divvy it up, with staff or whom,
Nice.
let's share the wealth a little bit.
Love it. Um, what is one major challenge that what's one of the bigger challenges you're facing in your business right now?
Um, Scaling as comfortably as possible. We've
Gotcha.
grown from the first several years of the business. My focus has been our craft, our
Hmm.
product, our service, and it's
Hmm.
shifting a little bit more to like training.
Mm.
As we get
Hmm.
bigger, of just being more and more passionate and focused on our training, our systems, and making sure that that's being recreated, even if I'm not necessarily on the front lines.
Yeah,
And
got it.
so,
Makes sense. What is a book or two that you could recommend for our audience?
I've always loved The Go-Giver.
That's a good one. Yeah,
Yeah.
love it. What is one question that you wish I'd asked that I haven't asked?
How much do you bench press? No.
How much do you
Geez.
bench press, Dave, and why is it 135? I'm just kidding.
Did you say
Um,
35 or 135?
one. I gave you the one there.
Thank you. Question you didn't ask me.
Anything you want
You
to
asked
cover?
great questions. Yeah, no,
Okay,
I don't. Yeah.
awesome. So this has been great, Dave. I really appreciate you being vulnerable and in on many parts of your story, and it's a very different episode than we've had before. So this is going to be fantastic for the listener for sure. So speaking of the listener, where can they find you online? Where can they research your company?
Yeah, smithhouse.com with one H is our website.
Fantastic. You don't want to give out your cell phone number? I'm just kidding. I
Maybe in
wouldn't
the
if
show
I were
notes.
you.
Yeah.
There you go. Awesome. Well, Dave Smith of Smith House. Any other words of wisdom before we head out of here?
I know. I really appreciate you having me, Jamie. I hope that I'm self-conscious about how I sound. I tend to sound nasally and squeaky, so hopefully you can edit the video or whatever somehow
Yeah.
with that. But
Well, I've got getting over a little bit of a cold, so I think I'm probably going to sound worse than you do. But thanks a lot for spending your time with us, Dave. Really appreciate it. This has been awesome. And to the listener out there, thank you for spending your most valuable resource with us, and that is your time. Thanks, everyone. Take care.